welcome everybody to the first visual version of the More Kingston Smith David's review weekly dive into the advertising world. I'm delighted that I can actually see Jason Stone as opposed to just swap emails with him. So hi, Jason.
Hello, it's good to see you as well.
Yeah, I think maybe the best place to start with, where I think just approaching 8 weeks into lockdown, and trying to give us your overview as to how you've seen the advertising world in that 8-week period.
Disappointing. I think everyone has obvious difficulties. The challenges are immense, but as yet it feels as though the industry is really struggling to rise to that challenge. I think it's probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago that a mock ad started doing the rounds, making the point that so much of the output is similar. Basically there's actually 2 templates. There isn't one template, but there's a piece of work which someone's put together, which is an amalgamation of all of the kind of quarantine ads, which makes the point that a lot of them follow a very similar template of, we're all in it together as we see empty streets and plaintive piano music, and then ends on a kind of meaningless homily. And it's a point I've been making from quite early on too. I know I'm being ungenerous. I know I'm not in the thick of it, needing to persuade clients that now is the time for their voice to be heard. But that is the job of the advertising agencies to do that and to successfully make that case.
Yeah, interestingly, I spoke to a client of mine who's a documentary maker, and he said that every phone call he's getting, rather depressingly, is to make a COVID-19 documentary. So I'm guessing that maybe most briefs that are coming out are, please make an ad that says we're all in it together type thing. And maybe that's how the output comes like it does.
I'm sure that's the case. And I think that does excuse up to a point. I think the difficulty I have is believing that every single client is singing from that same hymn sheet. I'm not talking here about a complaint that it's generally that way. That is completely ubiquitous at the moment. Between user-generated content, which essentially has the same sentiment, and films of empty streets and using old clips to say that soon things will be back to normal and so on. Between those 2 models, we've seen nothing else. And I mean nothing else. And what strikes me is that really the first brands that raise their head above the parapet to face the challenge of quarantine conditions, but not make a film which is about quarantine, may well find that there's a dividend in that. Because I think that's what people want to hear. My instinct is that the audience has heard this message now over and over again, really doesn't need to hear it again. And the other point I'd make is that the aggregate impact, ads come in clusters, TV ads come in clusters, typically 5 at a time in an ad break. You really don't want your ad to look exactly the same as before in any circumstances. And so for that reason alone, they should be seeking to distinguish themselves.
There have been honourable exceptions. I mean, rather nerdishly, I kind of read what you produce every week with us, and also have listened to the podcast. And there was the Joe Connor music video for the Stones, which obviously you highlighted, and also in the conversation with Niels, you talked about an ITV thing. So I mean, there are clearly some things out there which are trying to break ground.
There are, and funnily enough, I think there have been a number of imaginative promos, and if brands are looking for examples, pop promos that is, I think if brands are looking for examples of how quarantine work can be interesting, have a look at what the directors have done in the pop promo realm. But I think that's a function of the fact that that's a very different approval process, that essentially a director and an artist are able to, as long as they can forge an agreement about what they want to do, the record company is not going to stand in the way. I think where brands and agencies are concerned, they're very used to quite a protracted process of decision making. And that's the first thing they should suspend in these circumstances. They should make it easier. They need to streamline that process, then streamline the filmmaking process. Streamline everything because the circumstances require it. And the ITV thing, to be honest, it is good, but it's just the best example of the template we're talking about. It isn't different from it, unfortunately.
We now run a weekly lunch club, and one of the people on our call yesterday said he doesn't suspect it's going to be an era of award-winning work, which may be depressingly kind of what you're putting your finger on. I mean, you talk to a lot of people as well. Do you perceive any change coming?
No, I keep asking people whether they're seeing scripts which are older, should we say, and I'm starting literally last week, in the last few days of this last week, to hear that agencies are starting to get there in terms of creating scripts that might face that challenge. But no, I think there's another reason for it, which is slightly more valid, and this comes from the communication from central government. Just look at the last few days. There are reasons to believe that lockdown could completely end within the next couple of weeks. Now, it's not going to, by the way, but that sort of that kite is being flown by central government, and therefore, why would you commission a project to be made under the great difficulties of quarantine, where it kind of only works if it's made under quarantine, if you know what I mean, when the possibility exists that within a few weeks you won't have to face those difficulties. And I think that is a big contributing factor for which I think the ad industry can be forgiven. Because
although in fairness, a lot of the production issues don't disappear, right? The big imponderable issues about, how you get people social distance, you have to have people with PPE, you're suddenly into health and safety, you still have huge insurance issues. So a lot of the practicalities of probably making really good production are still going to be in place, even when they start lifting the lockdown.
I suspect so. And if I was, if God forbid, someone made me an executive creative director of a big agency, what I would be asking my creatives to do is write foolproof scripts. Because despite what I just said, actually, if you can create something that will go ahead no matter what the circumstances, and it'll be good no matter what the circumstances, then you kind of got the situation covered. Yeah. And I think back to, I've mentioned the natural confectionery ads from a few years ago that always spring to mind because I loved them, which basically, I don't know if you remember these, Graham, these are the ones where they had like the sweeties themselves, which are sort of more like little dinosaurs, and all the work was done with voiceovers, and the kind of characterization was just moved by zooming in and stuff like that. You could just do a director could do that on the living room floor, and it would work just as well as it did, 5-6 years ago, whenever those were made. And that's the kind of thinking that's required here. Make work to the circumstances and write scripts that can be made, no matter what. That would certainly be what I would be saying.
So just to kind of round up, is there anything in the last week or so that has caught your eye over and above the stuff that we've already talked about?
I so want to say yes.
You can say no, right? It's allowed.
In the promos realm, there have been some interesting work, for sure. And I mean, and I think there's probably a greater effort. I mean, the one film we haven't mentioned actually, and it does warrant a mention, is the film that Mind's Eye put together through their home studio initiative. Yeah. Now, this is clever. So essentially, what they've done there is that they've storyboarded script and then sent it out to a number of different filmmakers who are affiliated to them through home studio. And essentially, they then, as I understand it, they've basically put their hands up for any part of that storyboard that they can cover. And then each of those components has been put together as though it was directed by one person. Now, that is a very clever way around it. And that's the kind of imagination I'm talking about. That's really creative. Yes, the outcome isn't going to win any awards, but arguably it should, because it's an incredibly clever way of dealing with these circumstances, and that's what's needed. And I think, I've long said that advertising has a slightly skewed idea of the creativity it should pursue. Advertising has a tendency to pursue the creativity of fine art, in that it wants to make beautiful films that win awards and win recognition for filmmakers. Whereas actually, advertising should be concerned with the creativity of architecture or engineering, because it has a purpose, and its purpose is to sell stuff. Just as the purpose of an engineer is to build a bridge. If they build a bridge, it's got to get across a ravine. If an architect designs a building, it's got to be its first job is that it doesn't collapse.
Yeah.
And I think advertising is full of broken, very, very pretty
broken buildings,
and broken buildings, which sit in the bottom of ravines and are piles of rubble, because they forget that core function a lot of the time. This is a really good moment for advertising to pick up that purpose and do the right thing by their clients and stop worrying. I mean, again, not to go on, but let's be honest about production values. Production values are something that filmmakers do for themselves, not for the audience. The audience isn't astute enough to notice a lot of the time the very fine detail that goes into making something really special. We notice as critics, and Graham, you've been involved in this industry enough.
I'm glad you included me in that. I'm not sure I do notice, but yeah, I understand what you're saying.
The public certainly doesn't notice. The public has been passing around viral videos on their phones for 15 years now, and many of the most popular pieces of content that do the rounds, production values are nothing. They're filmed on an iPhone. Content is everything. Creativity isn't dependent on production values. And again, that's something else. Stop being so vain about your output. Just make something that works. And if it's well written, and it's well written in this moment, maybe you will win an award for it.
Nothing if not as forthright as ever, Jason. Thank you. We sailing hope, and be well, and we'll probably catch up in a week's time.
Thank you. It's very enjoyable letting me rant like that.